If you've ever worked a night shift, you probably know the feeling. That strange kind of silence when it feels like the entire world is asleep, but somehow something else is still awake. And sometimes that something isn't human. Tonight, I'm gonna share 5 stories that you might not want to listen to alone. The first story happened when I was working as a night manager at a small rental complex on the outskirts of town. The job itself was pretty easy. Most nights I just sat in a small office, occasionally walking around to check on things. The place had 2 rows of rooms. The front row was usually occupied, but the back row was almost always empty. People said something bad had happened there a long time ago. I didn't really believe in that kind of thing, at least not at the time. One night, at around 2 a.m., I heard a sound coming from the back row. It sounded like a chair being dragged across the floor. Slow, heavy, scraping. At first, I thought maybe someone had just moved in without me noticing, but when I checked the records earlier that night, those rooms were still empty. I grabbed a flashlight and walked outside. The air was still, no wind, no movement. When I reached the back row, everything was completely dark, except for one room. The door was slightly open. As I got closer, the dragging sound suddenly stopped. I stood there for a moment, then slowly pushed the door open. There was no one inside. The room was empty, but in the center of the room, there was a chair, and it was still moving, gently rocking back and forth, like someone had just stood up seconds before I walked in. After that night, I never checked that part of the building alone again. The second story happened when I was working the night shift at a small hotel. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most nights were quiet, and that night was no different until around 3 a.m. A man walked in. He didn't say much, just handed me his ID and asked for a room. What stood out immediately was that he didn't have any luggage. No bag, no suitcase, nothing. I went through the usual process and gave him a key for room 203. But when I looked up, he was suddenly standing much closer to the desk, closer than he was just a second ago. I hadn't heard him walk, not even a single step. He looked straight at me and asked, "Has anyone ever died here?" I forced a small laugh and told him no. He didn't respond. He just stared at me for a few seconds, then turned and walked toward the stairs. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang. It was room 203. I picked it up. I said hello, but no one answered. There was only breathing, slow, heavy breathing. So close, it felt like it was right next to my ear. I immediately checked the security cameras. The hallway outside, room 203, was empty. The door was closed. Nothing unusual. Then I looked at the camera facing the front desk, and that's when I saw him. The man. He was standing there, right behind me. The third story happened when I worked as a night security guard in an office building. After midnight, the entire place was empty. My job was simple: walk around, check each floor, then sit at the front desk. At around 3 a.m., I heard something, a knocking sound, soft but clear. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from the glass door at the entrance. I looked outside. There was no one there. I figured it was just the wind, even though the air had been completely still all night. So I went back to my chair. A few minutes later, the knocking came again. This time, louder, more urgent. I stood up and walked toward the door, and that's when I realized something. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside, right behind me. The fourth story is something that happened to a friend of mine who used to work as a taxi driver at night. He told me that after midnight, most of his passengers were either drunk or completely silent. But one night, he picked up someone different. It was around 2:30 a.m. A woman was standing by the side of the road. She was wearing a long, pale dress, her head slightly lowered. He stopped the car. She got in and sat in the back seat. She didn't say anything. He asked where she wanted to go. After a few seconds, she gave him an address. Her voice was quiet, almost like a whisper. As he started driving, he noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. Her face, he couldn't see it clearly. It was like her features were blurred or hidden in shadow. He tried not to stare, but then she spoke again. "Do you ever pick up passengers that aren't really there?" He froze. For a moment, he thought she was joking. He forced a laugh, but when he looked back into the mirror, the back seat was empty. He swore the door never opened. The last story happened to me just a few months ago. I was home alone. It was late, around 3 a.m. I wasn't working that night, but I still couldn't sleep, so I stayed up, watching random videos. At some point, I heard something, a soft sound, coming from behind me. I turned around. Nothing, just my room. Dark, quiet. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, closer, like someone shifting, very slightly, right behind my chair. I didn't turn around. I just sat there, listening, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Then I heard breathing, slow, uneven, not mine, right next to my ear. I grabbed my phone and switched on the front camera, and for just a second, I thought I saw something sitting behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. If you're listening to this right now, and everything around you feels just a little too quiet, you might want to take a second and listen carefully, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see, it's what's been there the whole time, right behind you.